On New Year's Eve, I returned to Denver, hoping to surprise my daughter with a warm reunion, but instead, I found her shivering in the snow while her in-laws feasted inside. Laughter, champagne, and music filled the Hamilton mansion while my daughter was treated like an outcast. What began as a night of celebration turned into a shocking family drama of betrayal, humiliation, and hidden threats. I had to rescue her, confront a powerful family in court, and witness how justice can be twisted when money and influence rule. Yet in the middle of despair, unexpected allies stepped forward, and a spark of hope slowly returned. This story is not only about cruelty but also about courage, resilience, and the fight for dignity. If this family drama touches you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Now let me take you back to that freezing night when it all began. The night air in Denver was sharp and biting as I stepped out of the taxi. Snowflakes swirled in the wind, dancing under the street lamps before landing silently on the pavement. The city had been alive only moments earlier, filled with families hurrying home from church or heading to midnight gatherings. Children clutched sparklers in their hands, couples walked arm in arm beneath glowing wreaths, and laughter echoed through the winter air. But here in the quiet cul-de-sac where my daughter lived, the world seemed strangely still. My boots sank into the snow as I pulled my coat tighter, my heart racing with both excitement and nervousness. I had returned unannounced, hoping to surprise my daughter Clara on New Year's Eve, and all I could imagine was her face lighting up when she saw me. For weeks I had planned this visit in secret. Clara had sounded tired during our last phone call, her voice fading as though weighed down by burdens she refused to name. I told myself it was only exhaustion, that she had been busy preparing for the holiday season with her husband Victor and his wealthy family. I convinced myself she would be fine, that perhaps she just needed rest. Yet something in her tone had troubled me, and when I finally decided to make the trip, I felt both relief and anticipation. I wanted to see my daughter again, to hold her close, to remind her that she was never alone. As I reached the Hamilton residence, the glow of golden light spilled from the windows, spilling onto the snowy yard. The mansion rose tall and proud, adorned with wreaths, twinkling fairy lights, and silver ribbons that shimmered in the night. It was the sort of house that announced wealth from the moment you laid eyes on it. Behind the frosted glass, I could see shadows moving, glasses lifted in toasts, and hear faint notes of music floating into the night. My lips curved into a small smile. This was the moment, I thought. I would knock on the door, Clara would rush out, and perhaps for one evening we would forget the distance that had grown between us. But as I stepped closer, my smile faltered. The front steps were blanketed in snow, untouched by a shovel or even footprints, as if no one cared to clear a path. The contrast struck me. Inside, there was warmth and laughter, yet outside the world was left frozen and neglected. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the perfectly decorated wreath on the door, then let my eyes wander across the porch. That was when I saw her. Clara sat curled on an old wooden chair in the corner, her thin blouse clinging to her trembling shoulders. Her hair was messy strands, clinging to her damp cheeks, and her skin was pale against the cold night air. Her knees were pulled to her chest, as though she were trying to fold herself into nothingness. For a heartbeat, my mind refused to believe it. My daughter, my beautiful Clara, was outside in the snow while the rest of the family enjoyed the holiday inside. I rushed to her, my breath catching in my throat. "Clara," I whispered, my hands already fumbling to wrap my coat around her fragile frame. Her skin was icy to the touch, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. When her eyes met mine, red and swollen from tears, I felt my chest ache in a way words cannot describe. "Mom," she whispered faintly before collapsing against me. Her voice was so weak it nearly vanished into the wind. I held her tightly, rocking her like I had when she was a child afraid of the dark. My eyes stung, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "I am here, sweetheart. I have you now." She was so light in my arms, her body shivering uncontrollably. I lifted her gently, and her slippers slipped from her feet into the snow, leaving a trail of damp footprints behind us. For a moment I simply stood there, holding her against my chest, torn between disbelief and fury. Inside the house I could hear voices rise in laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, the hum of a piano playing a festive tune. The contrast between their joy and her suffering was unbearable. I turned back toward the window and caught sight of the Hamilton family gathered around the dining table. There was Victor, tall and confident, pouring wine into his father's glass. His mother, Regina, raised her glass in a toast, her diamond earrings sparkling in the light. Lydia, his sister, leaned in close to whisper something that made the others burst into laughter. They were surrounded by roasted lamb, silver platters of food, and golden candlesticks flickering like stars. And yet Clara had been left outside in the cold. My pulse quickened, anger swelling like a storm inside me. This was not a misunderstanding or a simple mistake. This was deliberate cruelty. The Hamiltons had chosen to leave my daughter to freeze while they indulged in their celebration. I pressed my lips together, swallowing the rising fury that threatened to escape. This was not the moment to shout or rage. My first duty was to protect Clara, to bring her to warmth, to steady her fragile body. But the seed of vengeance had already been planted in my heart. I whispered softly to Clara as I pulled the coat tighter around her. "Hold on, my love. I will not let them break you." Her eyes fluttered, closed exhaustion overtaking her, and I kissed her damp forehead silently, promising that no one would ever treat her this way again. As I shifted her weight in my arms, I could not stop myself from glancing once more at the brightly lit dining hall. The sight of their smug faces, their careless joy, burned into my memory. Every smile at that table, every mocking laugh that floated through the walls, would be fuel for the fight that was to come. The night was cold, the snow biting against my boots, but I no longer felt it. All I felt was rage, sorrow, and determination. I turned away from the mansion and carried my daughter down the snowy steps, her head resting against my shoulder. My breath fogged the air as I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." And as I disappeared into the shadows of the street with Clara in my arms, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever secrets and cruelties the Hamilton family was hiding behind their glittering walls, I would uncover them all. I carried Clara back to the sidewalk, my boots crunching against the snow. My breath came out in harsh clouds, but I refused to stop until I felt her head lift ever so slightly from my shoulder. She stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open, and whispered, "Do not take me inside, Mom. Please." Her words cut deeper than the cold air around us. She was afraid not of the weather, but of the warmth and light behind that grand door. I stopped and looked back at the Hamilton mansion. Through the wide dining room window, the picture inside could have been painted for a holiday card. The oak table stretched long and gleaming, lined with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and gold-rimmed plates. In the center rested a roasted leg of lamb, glistening under the chandelier. Beside it sat bowls of cranberry relish, creamy potatoes, and stacks of freshly baked bread. It was a feast fit for royalty. And yet my daughter, the wife of their son, had been left outside to freeze. My chest tightened as I watched Victor rise from his chair, lifting his glass high. His deep voice carried over the music and laughter. To family, he declared, smirking as if he were the perfect husband, the perfect son. The others clinked their glasses against his with ease. Regina, his mother, raised hers with elegant precision, her diamond rings catching the light. Her eyes narrowed slightly as though the toast was also a judgment. Her lips curved into a satisfied smile. Lydia, Victor's sister, leaned across the table to whisper into the ear of her husband. I could not hear her words, but the smug curl of her lips told me everything. Whatever she had said made the group burst into laughter. Even Victor's father, Richard Hamilton, a man whose stern posture radiated authority, allowed himself a low chuckle. It was in that moment I realized Clara had not been forgotten. She had been deliberately excluded. Their joy was sharpened by her suffering, their toast brighter because she was outside in the snow. They were celebrating her humiliation. I felt Clara shiver against me again and knew I could not linger on the sidewalk. I shifted her weight in my arms and stepped toward the porch. As I reached the edge, I heard Victor's voice again, louder this time, as though he wanted the world to hear. Imagine calling this woman my wife. She cannot even give me a child. 5 miscarriages, he boasted cruelly, his tone dripping with disdain. She is cursed, and yet I am the one who must endure her weakness. The table roared with laughter. My vision blurred with tears of rage. How dare he, I thought. How dare he take the deepest pain of my daughter and parade it like a cheap joke before his family? Clara buried her face against my chest, but her body shook, each cruel word cutting deeper. Regina set her glass down with a sharp clink and leaned forward, her voice clear and sharp. She was never worthy of this family. She brings shame with every failure. A woman who cannot provide heirs has no place in a Hamilton home. Beside her, Lydia laughed harshly, and she has the nerve to act fragile. Depression, headaches, all her excuses. She hides in her room pretending to be sick while we carry the weight of this family. The venom in her words seeped into me like poison. My hands trembled not from the cold but from fury. I wanted to storm inside right then to tear their false smiles from their faces, to flip that oak table and expose them for the hypocrites they were. But Clara's fragile body against me reminded me that I could not lose control. Not yet. Instead, I turned slightly, pressing my cheek against hers. "They will not break you, Clara," I whispered softly. "They cannot define you." My words seemed to melt into the wind, unheard by anyone but her. As I stood there, torn between restraint and outrage, my eyes returned to the table. Victor leaned back in his chair, smug, while Richard began carving the lamb with deliberate grace. The sound of the knife against the platter rang like a judgment. Regina raised her glass once more, smiling as she announced, "To the Hamilton legacy. May nothing weak or useless ever taint it." The cheer that followed was loud, echoing through the night like cruel bells. My grip on Clara tightened. I had never felt so powerless and so enraged at once. A faint noise reached my ears, breaking the rhythm of the celebration inside. It was a whimper, Clara's soft, broken sobs. She tried to hold them back, but the pain of hearing her own life mocked so openly was too much. Her tears dampened my coat, and each drop felt like fire against my skin. I wanted to march inside and demand answers, but I forced myself to stay still. The time for confrontation would come, but tonight was about protecting her first. I carried Clara toward the far end of the porch, away from the window's glow. Her breath was shallow, her face pale, but her eyes opened enough to meet mine. "I am nothing to them," she whispered. "They want me gone." The words cracked like fragile glass. I shook my head firmly. "You are everything to me, Clara. You are my daughter, and you will never be nothing." But even as I said it, I could not ignore the truth. The Hamiltons had built their wealth and power on reputation, and they had already begun rewriting Clara's story to erase her worth. Inside their gilded dining room, they saw her as nothing but a burden to be discarded. That realization seared itself into me harder than any winter frost. I knew then that this was not just cruelty. This was war disguised as family tradition. A deliberate effort to crush Clara's spirit and cast her aside. The night stretched on, the laughter from inside echoing like mockery. I stayed there with Clara in my arms, letting the sound etch itself into my memory. For every word they spoke, I promised myself there would be an answer. For every laugh at her expense, there would be a reckoning. Finally, Clara drifted into an exhausted sleep against me. Her face was damp with tears, her body trembling even as she rested. I looked once more at the glowing windows of the mansion, the silhouettes of the Hamilton family still toasting and laughing without a care. I whispered into the night, though no one could hear, "Enjoy your banquet, because it will be the last time you feast while my daughter suffers." And with that, I turned away from the glow of the house and carried Clara back down the snowy path. My fury was no longer a flicker. It was a fire that would not be extinguished. What I did not know yet was that the cruel banquet was only the beginning, and what waited behind those polished walls would reveal just how deep the Hamilton family's cruelty ran. The wind cut across my face as I held Clara closer, but I could no longer feel the cold. The fire inside me burned hotter than any winter storm. I wanted to carry her straight back to my small apartment, to wrap her in blankets and give her the safety she had been denied. Yet something compelled me to pause. The glow from the Hamilton dining room still poured into the night, bright and mocking, a cruel reminder that they celebrated her misery openly and without shame. I stood at the edge of the porch, hidden just enough in shadow, and listened. Their voices rose again, sharper this time, laced with venom that seemed designed to pierce Clara even as she drifted in my arms. Victor's voice boomed with arrogance. "My friends ask me why I tolerate her," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "I tell them it is pity. Who else would keep a woman so fragile, so incapable in his house?" The table burst into laughter, glasses clinking, silverware rattling against fine china. Clara stirred faintly and whimpered. Though her eyes were shut, she could still hear every word. I pressed my lips against her hair, whispering soothingly, but my own throat tightened with rage. Then Regina's voice cut through cold and sharp like broken glass. A Hamilton woman must bring strength to this family, not shame. She has failed us 5 times over. 5 times. Do you know what people say about us now? That our family name is cursed. She brings ruin. She paused, sipping her wine, before adding in a lower, venomous tone. If she had any dignity, she would leave this house and never return. The words struck me like a blow. My daughter had been through 5 miscarriages, each one tearing her apart piece by piece. I had held her through long nights on the phone, listened to her sob until no tears remained. To hear those losses turned into weapons against her was unbearable. Lydia Victor's sister leaned forward eagerly, her eyes glittering. Imagine calling that woman a wife. She hides in her room pretending to be ill, pretending to grieve, when in truth she is lazy. She avoids the duties of a real Hamilton woman. She cannot cook, she cannot clean, and she cannot bear children. Tell me, what good is she? Her husband chuckled and shook his head. Useless, he said. The word hung in the air, cruel and final. At that moment, Clara's body convulsed with a quiet sob. Her thin frame shook in my arms. She whispered weakly, "I tried, Mom. I tried so hard." My heart shattered. She had poured every part of herself into her marriage, into her dream of building a family. And still, they had reduced her to nothing more than a punchline in their cruel banquet. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the roar of fury that threatened to escape. My hands tightened protectively around Clara. Inside the house, their laughter continued, indifferent to the pain they caused. To them, her suffering was entertainment. Richard Hamilton, the patriarch, finally spoke. His voice was deep, authoritative, a judge passing down a sentence. Enough. A weak branch must be cut before it poisons the whole tree. If Victor wishes to remove her, I will support it. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Victor laughed, a sharp and cruel sound. "Do not worry, Father," he said. "She will not last long. She is already half gone." The table erupted once more in laughter, louder than before. My fists trembled. Every instinct in me screamed to burst through the door, to drag them out into the snow, to make them answer for what they had done. But I forced myself to stay where I was. Not yet. 2 small figures darted from the table. Lydia's children ran to the porch, their laughter high-pitched and innocent. They stopped when they saw me holding Clara, but instead of concern, their faces lit up with mischievous delight. "Aunt Clara is in trouble," one of them whispered, and they both giggled. The sound pierced deeper than the jeers of the adults. Even the children had been taught to mock her pain. Clara buried her face against me again, but I felt her tears soaking through my coat. I could not let this continue. I could not let them crush her further. The music inside grew louder, as if mocking me, a jaunty piano tune that clashed with the cruelty in their words. The Hamiltons toasted again, their voices echoing into the night. "To legacy, to strength, to the future," they cried. Each cheer was another knife in Clara's heart. I looked down at her fragile face, pale and streaked with tears. Her lips moved faintly, whispering words I could barely hear. "I do not belong here. They will never let me belong." Her despair filled me with both sorrow and fury. I pressed my cheek against hers and whispered fiercely, "You belong with me, Clara. You belong with those who love you, not with those who tear you apart." But even as I said it, I knew this was not enough. Words alone could not protect her. Action was needed. I stepped back, steadying Clara in my arms, and looked at the great wooden door that separated us from the banquet. The warm light spilled through the cracks, illuminating the snow at my feet. I knew that behind that door were people who believed themselves untouchable, people who had twisted family into a weapon. The fire in my chest burned brighter. Every cruel laugh, every venomous word, every false smile carved itself into my memory. They thought they could humiliate her in silence, that no one would stand up for her. But they had forgotten who her mother was. I adjusted Clara carefully, her weight light but precious in my arms. I could hear Victor laughing again, bragging about the Hamilton name, mocking her fragility, boasting of his own strength. His arrogance filled the night like smoke, suffocating and thick. I set my jaw, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Enough. I turned back to the door, my steps firm and unyielding. The laughter inside grew louder as if daring me to act. I reached the porch, planted my feet on the wooden boards, and raised my hand. This was no longer about a ruined holiday or a cruel joke. This was about my daughter's dignity, about every wound she had carried alone. I pounded on the door. The sound thundered through the night, shaking the frame, silencing the piano, and startling the voices inside. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then I drew in a sharp breath, my rage and sorrow boiling together into words that had waited too long to be spoken. And that was the moment when the Hamiltons were about to discover what it meant to face a mother who refused to be silent. My fist slammed against the door again, harder this time. The echoes thundered through the wooden frame until I was certain every soul inside the mansion had heard it. The music halted abruptly, and the muffled laughter cut short. For a brief moment, the world stood in silence, broken only by the howling wind outside and the shallow breaths of Clara in my arms. The handle clicked. The door creaked open, and there stood Regina Hamilton, holding a crystal glass of red wine. Her lips were painted a glossy shade of crimson, and her face carried the smug smile of a woman convinced of her superiority. She tilted her head as if inspecting a nuisance at her doorstep. "Well, Margaret Dawson," she drawled smoothly, her voice syrupy but cold. "What a surprise! You should have told us you were coming. We might have rolled out the red carpet." Her eyes flicked to Clara cradled against me, and for a fraction of a second her expression twisted with disdain. Then the mask returned. She sipped her wine as though we were nothing more than entertainment. "Let you know," I hissed, my voice trembling with fury. "If I had, you would have hidden your cruelty behind false smiles. What did you do to my daughter?" Regina raised an eyebrow and shrugged, her tone deliberately casual. "Clara said she wanted some fresh air. She was being dramatic as usual. Nothing more. Fresh air." The words clawed at my chest. My daughter was half frozen in my arms, her lips pale, her body trembling, and this woman dismissed it as if it were a choice. Before I could respond, another figure appeared behind Regina. Victor, his shirt half unbuttoned, a bottle of wine dangling carelessly from his hand. His posture radiated arrogance, as if the house and everyone in it were under his command. He smirked when his eyes landed on me. "Mother, close the door," he said flatly, his tone dripping with contempt. "If she wants to parade her fragility, let her do it outside. We are celebrating, not babysitting." Clara stirred in my arms, shrinking at the sound of his voice. Her frail body curled tighter against me as though she wanted to vanish. That was when something inside me snapped. I shifted Clara into one arm and planted my foot against the doorframe. With one sharp kick, the heavy oak door swung open, slamming against the wall with a bang that rattled the chandelier above the entryway. Regina gasped, her wine glass sloshing and spilling crimson stains onto the Persian rug. The chatter and laughter from the dining hall died, instantly replaced by stunned silence. I stepped into the mansion, dragging the cold winter air with me. Snowflakes clung to my coat, melting into dark patches as I carried Clara past Regina's shocked face. Each step left wet prints on the polished hardwood floor. The dining room stretched before me, glowing with golden light. The long oak table was laden with food-roasted lamb, steaming potatoes, bowls of fresh salad, champagne bottles glinting under the chandelier. Around it sat the Hamilton family in their finery. Richard the Patriarch stood slowly from the head of the table, his sharp eyes narrowing. Lydia leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her lips curling in disdain. The children stared wide-eyed, then snickered behind their hands. Every gaze was locked on me, some filled with annoyance, others with outright hostility. But I no longer cared. I carried Clara to the velvet couch near the fireplace and gently set her down. Her hands trembled as I wrapped my scarf around her shoulders. I brushed her damp hair from her forehead, whispering softly, "You are safe now, sweetheart." Then I straightened, turning to face the family. Victor sauntered closer, his smirk widening. "You do not get to make a scene in my house, Margaret," he sneered, his voice low but mocking. "This is our family matter. You are an outsider." The word outsider struck like a whip, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I jabbed my finger toward him, my voice breaking with fury. "You call yourself a husband. You throw my daughter into the snow while you laugh at her pain. Is that what you call family?" Victor's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Richard's deep voice boomed across the room. "That is enough, Mrs. Dawson," he commanded, his tone carrying the weight of years on the bench. "A woman who cannot bear children must endure her failures in silence. That is the way of life. You should not interfere." His words struck like a hammer. I locked eyes with him, seeing not only arrogance but the smug certainty of a man who believed power and tradition placed him above all consequence. My fury erupted. "You sit here feasting, while my daughter trembles outside in the freezing night. You mock her for her grief, for her losses, and you dare call that tradition, you dare call that humanity." Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table, but Regina only smiled thinly and raised her glass. "A woman who cannot give life has no value," she said softly, almost sweetly, though her words dripped with poison. "Even if she eats at this table, she is wasting food." Lydia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Your daughter has always pretended to be ill," she spat. "She hides behind depression to avoid lifting a finger. She has never been a true wife, never cooked, never supported Victor. All she does is drag this family down." Their words twisted like knives. I felt Clara stir weakly on the couch, her lips parting as though she wanted to defend herself, but no strength came. Her voice broke in a whisper. "No one understands. I am so tired." Before I could comfort her, Victor barked across the room. "Enough! Shut your mouth, Clara. You have embarrassed me enough already." His rage-filled voice silenced her completely. She shrank into the couch, her hands clutching the scarf I had wrapped around her. Her red-rimmed eyes filled with tears, and my own heart clenched at the sight. I stepped forward, positioning myself between Victor and my daughter, my body a shield. "Not another word," I said coldly, my voice trembling but sharp as a blade. "You will not speak to her like that again." The room grew heavier, thick with tension. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the air felt suffocating, charged with the weight of unspoken war. Victor's smugness faltered for just a moment, a flicker of doubt passing through his eyes. But Richard stepped forward, adjusting his tie, his presence commanding. "You have no idea who you are challenging Margaret Dawson," he intoned, his voice heavy with warning. "We are the Hamiltons. We do not bow to the threats of desperate women." I drew in a breath, my fury settling into icy resolve. "You will pay for what you have done to Clara," I declared, my words steady and deliberate. "This is not a family matter anymore. This is abuse, and it will not stay hidden." The silence that followed was deafening. The Hamiltons stared at me, some with mockery, some with anger, but none with remorse. Clara's fragile form shivered behind me, and I knew the fight ahead would not be easy. Still, I stood tall in their opulent dining hall, my heart pounding like a drum. The battle lines had been drawn, and nothing in this house of gold and glass would ever be the same again. The Hamilton dining room hung heavy in silence after my words. Clara sat trembling on the couch, her eyes wide and filled with fear. Victor glared at me, his jaw tight, his arrogance fraying around the edges. Regina swirled the wine in her glass, her thin smile betraying the contempt she felt. Lydia muttered under her breath, but her eyes shone with satisfaction, as though she wanted me to explode so she could sneer at my loss of control. I refused to give them that victory. Instead, I bent down, wrapped Clara's scarf tighter around her frail shoulders, and whispered softly, "We are leaving now." She nodded faintly, though her lips quivered. Her hands clutched mine, as though they were the only anchor she had left. I rose to my full height and faced the family one last time. "You will not touch her again," I said firmly. My voice was not a shout, but a promise, low and steady, the kind of tone that carried weight even without volume. Victor took a step forward, his face twisted in rage. "This is my house. She is my wife. You cannot take her away from me." "She stopped being yours the moment you left her to freeze outside," I snapped. "A husband protects. You are nothing but a tyrant in a silk tie." His face flushed red. He opened his mouth, ready to retort, but Richard's voice cut through the tension. "Let them go," he said, coldly adjusting the cuff of his suit. "For now." The two words dripped with menace. "For now." They were not surrender. They were a warning. I didn't wait for another exchange. I slipped my arm around Clara, guiding her toward the door. The weight of every Hamilton glare followed us, burning against my back. Each step across the polished hardwood floor felt like marching across enemy territory. The children whispered and giggled, their innocent voices echoing cruel lessons they had already learned. Regina's glass clinked against the table as she raised it once more, mocking in her composure. As we stepped into the cold night air, I pulled Clara close. The mansion's golden glow spilled across the snow, but to me it no longer looked like a home. It looked like a fortress of cruelty. The door shut behind us with a sharp crack, and I exhaled, my breath fogging in the air. Clara leaned against me, her steps weak and unsteady. "I cannot go back, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, do not let them make me go back. You will never set foot in that house again, I promised." My words were steel. I guided her down the snowy path toward the street, where my old sedan waited. Each crunch of snow beneath our boots felt like a step away from hell. But even as relief tried to creep in, a shadow fell across the yard. A sleek black SUV idled near the end of the driveway, its engine rumbling low. The tinted windows revealed nothing, but I could feel eyes watching us. Clara clung to my arm, shivering. "Who is that?" I did not answer. My pulse quickened as I led her to the car, opening the passenger door and settling her inside. I draped my coat over her and kissed her forehead. "Stay here. Lock the door." She obeyed without a word, her fingers trembling as she pushed the lock down. I straightened, squaring my shoulders against the biting wind, and stared toward the SUV. Its headlights flickered once, then twice before the engine revved. Slowly, deliberately, the vehicle rolled past us, its tires crunching over the snow. As it passed, the tinted window lowered just enough for a hand to slide out. A folded envelope dropped into the snow with a soft thud. The SUV rolled away, disappearing down the darkened street. I bent down, scooped up the envelope, and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting rushed and messy. "Do not interfere with the Hamilton family. Walk away, or you will end up as broken as your daughter." My grip tightened on the paper until it crumpled in my fist. The threat was clear, but fear did not settle in me. Instead, it ignited the fire already burning in my chest. They thought they could scare me into silence the same way they had silenced Clara. They were wrong. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Clara looked at me with wide eyes, searching my face for answers. I reached over, squeezing her hand. "We are safe tonight," I said. "That is all that matters for now." The drive back to my cabin in the foothills was long and silent. Clara leaned against the window, her breath fogging the glass. The city lights gave way to winding roads and pine trees heavy with snow. The only sounds were the tires on icy pavement and the occasional creak of the heater. When we finally pulled into the gravel driveway of my cabin, Clara's eyes were half-closed, exhaustion tugging her down. I helped her inside, the warmth of the wood stove wrapping around us. The small living room glowed softly, lined with old books, framed photographs, and the worn quilt draped across the couch. It was humble, but it was ours. It was safe. I guided Clara to the couch and wrapped the quilt around her. She curled into it, her body still trembling, though less violently now. I brewed hot cocoa on the stove, the rich smell filling the air. When I placed the steaming mug into her hands, she stared at it as though it were something she no longer deserved. Her voice was small when she whispered, "Why do they hate me so much, Mom?" I sat beside her, brushing her hair gently. "Because they are cruel, not because you are weak," I said. "You gave your heart and they trampled on it. But you are not what they say you are. You are my daughter, and you are stronger than you believe." Her eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded faintly and sipped the cocoa. The warmth seemed to soothe her, if only slightly. Later that night, after she had fallen into an uneasy sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the crumpled note in front of me. The fire cracked softly in the stove, but my thoughts burned hotter. They had threatened me, and I knew this was only the beginning. Richard's cold stare, Regina's venom, Victor's arrogance, none of them would let Clara go without a fight. But I had made a vow the moment I carried her from that porch. I would protect her. I would not let her be broken again. I smoothed out the note on the table and stared at the words, "Walk away, or end up broken." A bitter smile tugged at my lips. They thought they were warning me, but all they had done was confirm what I already knew. This was not over. And as the wind howled outside my cabin and snow piled higher against the windows, I whispered into the quiet, "You picked the wrong mother to threaten." The cabin was quiet the next morning, but my mind had not rested. I had spent most of the night at the kitchen table, the fire in the stove burning low as I stared at the threatening note. My hands trembled not from fear but from resolve. The Hamiltons wanted me silent, and that was exactly why I could not be. When Clara finally stirred, her eyes were heavy with exhaustion. She shuffled into the kitchen wrapped in the old quilt that had once belonged to my grandmother. She looked younger than her years, fragile like a bird with broken wings. I placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her, but she only pushed it around with her fork. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "you need strength. You have been through too much to let them keep draining you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I do not know if I have any strength left, Mom." I reached across the table, clasping her hand. "Then borrow mine. You are not alone anymore. I will fight for you, and I will fight with you." Her lips trembled, but she nodded faintly. It was enough. Later that morning, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Sergeant Reyes." "Daniel," I said, my throat tightening. "It is Margaret Dawson." There was a pause, then warmth entered his tone. "Coach Dawson, it has been years. What brings you back to Denver? I need your help," I said bluntly. "It is about my daughter Clara. The Hamilton family is destroying her. They left her outside in the snow last night while they feasted inside. I confronted them, and now they have threatened us." The silence on the other end was heavy. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice steady. "Where are you now?" "At my cabin up near Pinecrest Road." "I will come," he said firmly. "Do not go anywhere." True to his word, Daniel arrived an hour later, his police cruiser crunching over the gravel driveway. He stepped out taller than I remembered, his presence solid and commanding. Yet his eyes softened when they met mine. Inside the cabin, he removed his cap and sat at the kitchen table listening, as I recounted everything: Clara outside in the cold, the cruel words overheard, the banquet, the threats. His jaw tightened with every detail. Finally, he leaned forward, his hands clasped. "This is not just family cruelty. This is abuse, plain and simple. But the Hamiltons are powerful. They have friends in high places. If we are going to fight them, we need evidence, witnesses, and a lawyer who cannot be bought." "I have some evidence," I said, pulling a stack of envelopes from the drawer. Bank receipts, letters I had sent Clara, notes of money I had wired her over the years. Proof that I had supported her, proof that Victor had squandered what was meant for her. Daniel examined them carefully, nodding. "This will help. But we also need medical records, testimonies, anything that shows the damage they caused her." Clara sat silently on the couch, listening with downcast eyes. Daniel glanced at her, his voice gentler. "Clara, I know this is hard, but if you want to break free from them, you need to let us build this case. Will you allow us to try?" Her hands twisted in the fabric of the quilt. She hesitated, then whispered, "I am afraid. They will ruin us." Daniel's gaze was steady. "They have already tried, but I will not let them. I promise." Something in his tone seemed to reach her. She lifted her eyes for the first time and met his. A flicker of trust sparked, where only fear had been. That afternoon, I drove Clara into the city to meet with Dr. Evelyn Monroe, a therapist recommended by an old friend. Dr. Monroe was a kind woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back neatly and a voice that carried calm authority. She welcomed Clara into her office, which smelled faintly of lavender and was lined with shelves of books and small potted plants. After speaking with her for nearly an hour, Dr. Monroe turned to me with grave eyes. "Your daughter is suffering from severe depression," she said. "Repeated miscarriages combined with emotional abuse have left her deeply scarred. She needs safety, treatment, and time. If you are going to pursue this case, I will provide my professional records to support her claims." My throat tightened with both gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," I whispered. Clara sat beside me, her hands trembling, but for the first time in months, I saw a faint glimmer of relief in her face. Someone else understood. That evening, Daniel visited the cabin again, this time in plain clothes. He carried a grocery bag filled with fruit, and to my surprise, a stack of cookbooks. He set them gently on the table in front of Clara. "I remembered you used to like cooking," he said, his tone almost shy. "Maybe starting small, like baking bread or making soup, could help you find yourself again." Clara looked at the books with uncertainty, then at him. Her lips parted, and though her voice was quiet, it carried a depth of feeling. "Thank you." Daniel smiled, and I saw something soften in my daughter's face. Something I had not seen in a long time. Hope. Later that night, after Clara had gone to bed, Daniel and I sat in the living room, the fire casting long shadows across the walls. "You know they will not let this go," he said. "The Hamiltons will fight tooth and nail to silence you. They will use their influence, their money, everything they have. Are you ready for that?" I looked into the flames, my heart steady. "I have fought battles my whole life. This one is the most important of all. I will not back down." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we will need a lawyer. Someone strong, someone not afraid of them. I think I know just the man." I leaned back, exhaustion washing over me, but resolve steady in my chest. The path ahead would be long, filled with obstacles. But for the first time since that terrible night, I did not feel alone. Clara was beginning to find her voice again. Daniel stood by our side. Dr. Monroe would provide her expertise, and I had my own strength forged by years of struggle. The Hamiltons thought their power made them untouchable. Soon they would learn that no fortress of wealth could shield them from the truth. As the fire crackled and the snowstorm raged outside, I whispered a vow to myself. This is only the beginning. The day of the hearing arrived with the bite of a bitter Denver winter morning. The courthouse loomed tall and gray against the pale sky, its stone steps coated in frost. I held Clara's hand as we climbed them together. Her fingers were icy, trembling in my grasp, though I had wrapped them in thick woolen gloves. She walked with her head down, her shoulders hunched, as though every step dragged her back toward humiliation. "You are not alone," I whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "Look at me. We are walking into this together." Her eyes lifted, red, rimmed, and heavy, but she nodded. It was a fragile nod, yet it carried the faintest spark of resolve. Inside the courthouse, the halls echoed with footsteps and hushed voices. The smell of paper-polished wood and strong coffee clung to the air. I led Clara toward the courtroom where our lawyer, Samuel Clark, waited for us. He was a seasoned attorney in his 50s, broad-shouldered with streaks of gray in his beard. He had the steady presence of a man who had weathered many storms. "Margaret Clara," he greeted, his tone calm but serious. "I have reviewed everything, the receipts, the therapist's notes, Daniel's testimony. We have a case. But you must be prepared. The Hamiltons will come armed with influence and lies. Do not let them rattle you." Clara swallowed hard, her hands gripping her coat. I am afraid," she admitted. Samuel's gaze softened. "Fear is natural, but truth is on your side. Trust in that." When we entered the courtroom, the Hamiltons were already seated. Victor sat at the defense table in a sharp gray suit, his tie knotted with arrogant precision. He glanced at us briefly, a smirk tugging at his lips before he leaned back with false ease. Beside him sat his mother, Regina, dressed elegantly in deep green silk, her diamond earrings glinting like icy stars. Lydia perched primly with her husband, her expression dripping disdain. At the far end, Richard Hamilton commanded the space, simply by sitting, his broad shoulders squared, his eyes sharp as blades. He carried himself not as a defendant's father, but as a judge ready to bend the court to his will. The sight of them sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She clung to my arm until I gently guided her into her seat. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, a middle-aged man with a stern face that betrayed no hint of sympathy. He glanced down at the file before him, adjusted his glasses, and nodded. "This court is now in session." Samuel rose first, his voice steady as he began to present our case. He laid out the bank transfers I had sent Clara over the years, showing how I had supported her financially, while Victor squandered much of it. He presented Dr. Monroe's records outlining the deep depression Clara suffered as a result of repeated miscarriages and relentless verbal abuse. He called Daniel Reyes to the stand, who spoke with measured calm about the night he had seen Clara left outside trembling in the snow. Clara Harper, Samuel said, gesturing toward my daughter, was not simply neglected. She was subjected to deliberate cruelty. She was mocked, humiliated, and abandoned by those who were meant to protect her. As he spoke, I glanced at Clara. Her hands twisted in her lap, her lips pressed tightly together, but I could see her shoulders rise with each breath. She was listening. She was hearing someone finally speak her truth aloud. When Samuel finished, the Hamiltons' lawyer stood. He was young, sleek, his suit tailored to perfection, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," he began, "what we have here is not abuse but exaggeration. Mrs. Clara Hamilton has always been fragile, prone to melancholy and self-pity. The Hamilton family has provided her with every comfort food shelter status. Yet she has failed to fulfill her role as a wife. She has failed to maintain the household, failed to provide children, failed to support her husband. The words slammed against me like cold water. I clenched my fists beneath the table. He continued, his tone sharper now. Her claims of depression are convenient excuses. She preferred to stay in her room while the Hamilton family managed their estate. She enjoyed their generosity, and now when her marriage has collapsed, she seeks to smear their name. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Clara shrank in her chair, her face pale. I reached for her hand, but before I could, the lawyer called their first witness. Mrs. Martha, the Hamiltons' former housekeeper, took the stand. She shifted nervously but spoke clearly. Mrs. Clara never left her room. She left all the work to me. Cooking, cleaning, even setting the table, I had to do everything. She would cry, yes, but she did nothing to help this family. I pitied her, but she was lazy. The words stung like a whip. Clara gasped, shaking her head in disbelief. That is not true, she whispered, her voice trembling. I surged halfway to my feet before Samuel gently touched my arm, urging restraint. The judge glared at me. Silence in the courtroom. I sank back into my seat, my heart pounding, fury searing through me. The Hamiltons sat smugly, their faces unreadable, though I caught the faintest smirk on Regina's lips. Samuel rose again. Mrs. Martha, were you present when Clara miscarried? Did you comfort her when she grieved? The woman hesitated. No, but that is not. Then how can you claim she did nothing? Samuel pressed. How can you dismiss her pain as laziness when you did not live her losses? Martha's face faltered, her eyes darting nervously toward Richard. But before she could stumble further, the judge interjected. Enough. Proceed. The trial continued, a relentless back and forth. Each piece of truth we offered was met with a counterattack from the Hamiltons' lawyer. Each defense was twisted into accusation. Clara sat silently through it all, her head bowed, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. At last Samuel made his final request. Your Honor, we have one more piece of evidence. An audio recording from New Year's Eve capturing the Hamilton family's words as they mocked and humiliated Clara outside in the cold. Gasps rippled through the spectators. The judge frowned. Play it. The room filled with the cruel voices of the Hamiltons. Victor's jeering tone, she is cursed. She cannot even give me a child. Regina's sharp disdain. She should leave this house and never return. Lydia's venom. She hides behind depression, pretending to be sick. Clara's eyes welled with tears, her face pale as she heard her humiliation replayed before strangers. But before the recording finished, the Hamiltons' lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This recording was made without consent. It violates privacy rights and cannot be admitted as evidence. The judge's expression remained cold. Objection sustained. The recording is inadmissible. The air in the courtroom seemed to vanish. My heart plummeted. The clearest proof of their cruelty dismissed on a technicality. Clara buried her face in her hands, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. Daniel sat rigid in the back row, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. Samuel closed his folder with measured calm, but I saw the frustration in his eyes. The Hamiltons sat smugly once again, Richard leaning back with the composure of a man who had predicted every turn. Victor straightened his tie, his smirk returning. Regina touched her diamond earring and smiled faintly. Lydia whispered to her husband, her eyes glittering with triumph. I clenched Clara's hand, my voice low but steady. This is not over. Do you hear me? This is not over. She lifted her head just enough to meet my eyes, her own filled with pain. They will win, Mom, she whispered brokenly. But in my heart, even as the judge called for a recess, I knew the fight had only begun. The judge's gavel struck the bench, announcing the end of recess. I sat rigid on the hard wooden bench, my hand gripping Clara's as though it were the only thing keeping her anchored. She had not spoken since the recording was dismissed. Her eyes were hollow, her lips pressed tight, her body curled inward like she wanted to vanish from the world. The Hamiltons, on the other hand, returned to the courtroom with renewed vigor. Victor strode confidently to the defense table, adjusting his tie with a smirk. Regina floated in behind him, her silk dress rustling softly, her diamonds catching every glint of light. Lydia walked with her nose, slightly raised, her husband at her side, like a loyal shadow, and Richard the Patriarch entered last, calm and commanding, his presence alone enough to shift the air in their favor. The bailiff called for silence, and the proceedings resumed. The Hamiltons' lawyer rose first, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard many claims of abuse. But claims are not proof. The supposed audio recording has been deemed inadmissible. What remains is a series of exaggerated accounts, financial transfers between mother and daughter, and medical reports that, while sympathetic, cannot prove wrongdoing by this family." He turned smoothly, gesturing toward Clara. "This is a case not of abuse but of disappointment. Mrs. Clara Hamilton has failed to live up to her marital duties. She has suffered miscarriages, yes, but such tragedies are common and not the fault of her husband or his family. She has isolated herself, refused to contribute to the household, and now seeks to rewrite history with her mother's help." His words slashed through the air. Clara flinched, her shoulders trembling. I tightened my grip on her hand, trying to ground her. Then he gestured to a man sitting in the back row. "We call Dr. Alan Pierce to the stand." My stomach dropped. Dr. Pierce was Victor's longtime family physician. He walked to the front with the polished air of a man used to being respected. He raised his hand, swore his oath, and "Saturday, doctor." "Pierce," the lawyer began smoothly, "you treated Clara during her pregnancies, did you not?" "Yes," Dr. Pierce replied. His voice was calm, professional. "I oversaw her care during each miscarriage. Would you say her losses were due to neglect or mistreatment by the Hamilton family?" Dr. Pierce shook his head. "No. The miscarriages were unfortunate, but medically they were not preventable. Stress may have played a role, but there was no evidence of abuse. Clara often seemed withdrawn, but I interpreted that as emotional fragility rather than mistreatment." A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Clara gasped softly, her hand slipping from mine as tears filled her eyes. I wanted to rise to shout that he had ignored her cries, that he had never once questioned the cruel treatment she endured. But the judge's gaze was heavy, warning me to remain silent. The lawyer pressed on. "So in your professional opinion, Clara's suffering was not caused by her husband or his family?" Dr. Pierce nodded firmly. "Correct." The Hamiltons sat straighter, their confidence swelling. Victor smirked, exchanging a triumphant glance with his mother. Samuel, our lawyer, rose for cross-examination. "Dr. Pierce, you claim Clara's miscarriages were not caused by abuse, but did you ever inquire about her home environment? Did you ever ask how she was treated emotionally, doctor?" Pierce hesitated. "That was not my role. I treated her physical health." Samuel's voice sharpened. "So you ignored her tears. You dismissed her depression as mere fragility. Is that correct?" The doctor stiffened. "I treated her medical condition to the best of my ability. It was not enough. The damage had already been done." The next witness was even worse. Regina herself took the stand, her posture regal, her voice calm. "My daughter-in-law has always been welcomed into our home," she said sweetly, her words practiced. "We provided for her, celebrated her, supported her, but she was never satisfied. She spent her days in her room avoiding responsibilities. She rejected our efforts to help her, preferring to wallow in self-pity." Lydia chimed in from her seat, loud enough for the room to hear. "She was always pretending to be sick. We had to manage everything while she wasted away in her room." The lawyer smiled faintly, letting their words settle like poison in the air. Samuel rose again, his voice sharp. "Mrs. Hamilton, do you deny that on New Year's Eve you left Clara outside in freezing temperatures while your family feasted indoors?" Regina's lips curved into a cold smile. She said she wanted fresh air. We respected her choice. If she stayed out too long, that was her decision. The room erupted in whispers. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Fresh air. The same excuse she had given me that night, now spoken before a judge. Samuel pressed, his voice growing heated. "So leaving her half-frozen on your porch was her own fault?" Regina tilted her head, unflinching. "Yes." The judge rapped his gavel. "Order. Counsel, keep your questions concise." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. As Regina returned to her seat, she brushed past Clara with deliberate grace, pausing just long enough to whisper, "You are weak, and everyone knows it." Clara's breath hitched sharply. I turned to her, fury surging through me, but she shook her head faintly, tears spilling down her cheeks. The Hamiltons' lawyer stood once more. "Your Honor, this case is nothing more than a desperate attempt by a mother to rewrite her daughter's failures. The Hamilton family has done nothing but uphold their legacy, while Mrs. Clara Hamilton has brought them shame. We urge the court to see through these false accusations." Samuel rose for closing arguments, his voice heavy with passion. "Your Honor, this is not about legacy. This is about cruelty hidden behind wealth. Clara Harper Hamilton has been humiliated, abandoned, and treated as less than human. If the law cannot recognize her suffering, then what hope does any woman have? I ask you to see past the Hamiltons' influence and see the truth staring before you." The courtroom was silent when he finished. Clara sat trembling beside me, her face pale but her eyes flickering with something almost like defiance. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. "The court will reconvene tomorrow for final deliberations," he announced. "Until then, this session is adjourned." The gavel struck, echoing like a gunshot. As the spectators rose, I caught sight of Richard Hamilton leaning close to the judge, whispering something that made the man's lips tighten. A chill ran down my spine. Influence, connections. The very thing Samuel had warned about. Victor brushed past us on his way out, pausing just long enough to murmur in my ear, "Tomorrow you will see who really holds power in this city." His breath reeked of arrogance. I froze, my fists trembling at my sides. I turned to Clara, who was gripping her scarf tightly, her lips quivering but her gaze fixed on the floor. "Mom," she whispered, "I do not think we will win." I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my voice to steady. "Maybe not in their court. But this fight is not over. Not yet." Still, as we walked out into the cold evening air, my chest ached with dread. The Hamiltons had tightened their grip. Tomorrow's verdict would not be justice. It would be war. The morning of the verdict arrived colder than any before. A pale sun clung to the horizon, but it gave no warmth. Clara walked beside me up the courthouse steps, her face hidden behind a wool scarf, her body trembling beneath her coat. I squeezed her hand, but it felt limp, drained of strength. "Whatever happens today," I whispered, "you are still my daughter. You are still worthy." She nodded faintly, but her eyes remained fixed on the ground. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras poised. Neighbors, acquaintances, and curious strangers crowded in, drawn by the scandal of the Hamilton name. On the defense side, Victor sat tall in his sharp suit, smirking as if the room already belonged to him. Regina's emerald dress shimmered beneath the lights, her chin tilted proudly. Lydia leaned against her husband, whispering with an amused smile. And Richard sat calm, his presence heavy, his gaze fixed on the judge's bench, like a man confident of his influence. Samuel, our lawyer, leaned toward me as we Saturday. "Stay steady," he murmured. "No matter what they decide, this fight isn't finished." The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, his expression as stern and unreadable as always. He shuffled the papers before him, then cleared his throat. The room fell silent, the air heavy with anticipation. "This court has reviewed all testimony and evidence presented," he began, his voice dry and deliberate. "In the matter of the marriage between Victor Hamilton and Clara Harper Hamilton, the court grants the divorce requested by the plaintiff." Clara gasped softly beside me. Silent tears welled in her eyes. At least she was free from Victor's legal hold. I gripped her hand, urging her to breathe, to hold on, but the judge continued. "As for the claims of domestic abuse, the court finds insufficient evidence to support these allegations. Furthermore, regarding marital assets, due to the greater financial contributions of the defendant, the majority of shared property is awarded to Victor Hamilton." The words struck like a hammer. My chest tightened, my breath caught. Insufficient evidence. Assets to Victor. After everything, after the nights of despair, after the cruel banquet, after the threats, Clara was to leave with nothing. The Hamilton side erupted in smug whispers. Regina's lips curved into a satisfied smile as she reached for Victor's hand. Lydia let out a soft laugh, covering it with her palm. Richard leaned back, his eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. Clara broke. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as muffled sobs escaped her. My heart cracked with the sound. I wanted to hold her, to shield her from this humiliation, but rage surged through me like fire. I rose to my feet, my voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "This is not justice," I cried. "You saw how they treated her. You heard their cruelty. And you dare say there is no abuse. You dare take everything from her." Gasps echoed around the room. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order, sit down, Mrs. Dawson, or you will be removed." But I could not stop. My hands trembled, my voice breaking. "You let wealth and power blind you. You have failed my daughter. You have failed every woman who has ever been silenced by cruelty." The bailiff stepped forward, but Clara tugged at my sleeve, her tear-stained face pleading. "Mom, please," she whispered brokenly. "Stop, please." Her voice was enough to pull me back. I sank down beside her, my chest, heaving, my fists clenched so tight, my nails dug into my palms. The judge struck his gavel again. "The ruling stands. This court is adjourned." The gavel's crack was final, echoing like a gunshot that ended not only the trial, but a piece of my faith in justice itself. Victor rose slowly, smoothing his tie, his smirk widening as he approached us. He leaned close, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "I told you, Margaret, you cannot win against us. You are just an old woman shouting at the wind." I trembled with fury, every muscle in my body ready to snap. I wanted to strike him to wipe that arrogance from his face, but before I could move, Daniel appeared, standing tall between us. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing with restrained rage. Victor chuckled coldly. "Go ahead, hit me. You will lose everything just like her." Then he turned, walking out with his family trailing proudly behind him. Clara clung to me, sobbing into my shoulder. "I cannot fight anymore," she whispered, her voice raw. "I just want to go home." The word home broke me. Because what home was left for her now? As the courtroom emptied, Daniel sat beside us, his voice heavy. "I am sorry. I tried to be ready for this, but their reach goes deeper than I thought." Samuel packed his files, shaking his head. "We were up against influence, not law. They bent the system to their will." I wiped Clara's tears, my own vision blurring. "Then we fight them outside this courtroom," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. The walk out of the courthouse felt endless. Reporters swarmed with microphones, flashes from cameras bursting in our faces. Questions rained down. Did the Hamiltons buy the verdict, Mrs. Dawson? How do you feel about the ruling? Clara, do you regret filing? Clara shrank against me, burying her face in her scarf. Daniel shielded us with his broad frame, guiding us through the crowd until we reached the street. When we finally climbed into his car, Clara broke again. "It is over," she whispered, her eyes hollow. "They won." I turned to her, gripping her shoulders. "They may have won today, but the world saw you. They saw your pain. They will not forget. And I was right." That night, as we returned to my cabin, the story spread across the news. Bold headlines splashed across screens. "Hamilton divorce raises questions of justice." Photos of Clara clinging to me in court, her tear-streaked face exposed, spread across social media. Video clips of my outburst, my cry of, "This is not justice," circulated rapidly. Comments poured in online. Some defended the Hamiltons, but many others rallied behind Clara. The system failed her. How could they leave her with nothing? Money should not silence truth. As I scrolled through the flood of voices, my chest tightened with something unexpected: hope. The Hamiltons had won inside the courtroom, but outside, their fortress of power was beginning to crack. I glanced at Clara, who sat quietly on the couch, her hands curled around a mug of tea. Her eyes were swollen, her spirit bruised, but for the first time I saw her reading the words on the screen. Her lips trembled, and she whispered almost in disbelief, "People believe me." I nodded, tears blurring my sight. "Yes, sweetheart. They see you now." But as I tucked her in that night, I could not shake the shadow in my chest. The Hamiltons would not let this public scrutiny go unanswered. They had power, influence, and arrogance enough to strike back. Still, as I watched my daughter drift into uneasy sleep, I made a vow in the quiet of the cabin. They might have won in court, but I would not let them win in life, and I knew the real battle was only just beginning. The days after the verdict moved slowly, like trudging through heavy snow. Clara barely spoke at first. She would sit by the cabin window for hours, wrapped in the old quilt, staring out at the pine trees swaying against the gray sky. Sometimes her eyes were dry, fixed on nothing. Other times, tears rolled silently down her cheeks, leaving trails on her pale skin. I kept busy. Every morning I cooked breakfast pancakes with syrup one day, scrambled eggs with toast the next. I set the plate in front of her, encouraging her to eat. Some mornings she took only a few bites, others none at all, but I never stopped trying. The smell of food, the clatter of pans, the rhythm of normal life. I hoped these small things would remind her that she still belonged in this world. Daniel came often, sometimes in uniform, other times in plain clothes. He brought groceries, flowers, or pastries from the bakery in town. He never forced conversation, never demanded more than she could give. He would simply sit nearby reading a newspaper or telling light stories about his patrols. Slowly I noticed Clara's shoulders ease around him. She began to lift her eyes when he spoke, to listen, even to respond in quiet tones. One evening he arrived carrying a small box. He handed it to Clara with an almost nervous smile. "I thought you might like this." Inside was a keychain shaped like a miniature martial arts uniform, white with a tiny black belt tied at the waist. Clara traced the edges with her fingertips, her eyes shining with tears she fought to hold back. "You do not have to be strong all at once," Daniel said gently. "But you can start again, little by little, just like your mother taught me years ago." Clara pressed the keychain to her chest. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but they carried the weight of a heart beginning to mend. In the weeks that followed, small changes bloomed. Clara began joining me in the kitchen. At first, she only stood beside me watching as I stirred soups or kneaded dough. Then one day she asked to try. Her hands trembled as she rolled pastry dough, but determination sparked in her eyes. The pie crust was uneven, but when we pulled it from the oven, the smell of cinnamon and apples filled the cabin. Clara smiled, a faint, fragile smile, but a smile nonetheless. Later she baked again, this time a loaf of bread with Daniel watching. When it came out golden, he clapped softly. "Looks better than anything I could make," he teased. Clara blushed, her lips curving upward for the first time in months. The world outside the cabin was shifting too. News outlets continued to cover the case. Opinion pieces appeared in local papers questioning the fairness of the ruling. On social media, Clara's tearful face and my cry of, "This is not justice," spread like wildfire. People debated, argued, demanded answers. The Hamilton name, once untouchable, was now paired with whispers of corruption and cruelty. Richard's colleagues in the legal community grew cautious. Old friends distanced themselves. Victor, once proud of his image as a rising lawyer, became a target of ridicule. Headlines called him the husband who left his wife in the snow. For the first time, cracks showed in their golden fortress. But inside our small cabin, our focus was not on their downfall. It was on Clara's healing. Spring arrived slowly in Denver. Snow melted into streams that trickled down the hills, and buds began to bloom on the trees. One afternoon, Clara asked if we could walk through the town square. Her voice was hesitant, but her eyes carried a quiet longing. So we went. The square bustled with families, children chasing each other, couples strolling hand in hand. Vendors sold pies and fresh bread, and the fountain sparkled in the afternoon sunday. Clara held my arm tightly at first, her steps uncertain, but as we walked, her grip loosened. The sun touched her face, and for the first time in months, I saw her smile fully radiant, warm, alive. "Mom," she said softly, her voice carrying both sorrow and hope. "I miss these days. When you used to take me to the square, when we baked together, when life felt safe." I squeezed her hand. "We will make new days like that, sweetheart. The past may have left scars, but the future is ours to shape." Daniel joined us, carrying a small paper bag of warm churros from a food stall. He handed one to Clara. She laughed softly as sugar dusted her fingers. They sat together on a bench, sharing food and quiet conversation. I watched them from a short distance, my heart swelling. For years, the Hamiltons had told Clara she was worthless. Now here was a man who saw her worth clearly, who valued her for who she was, not for what she could give. That evening back at the cabin, Clara grew quiet again. She sat across from Daniel on the couch, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I might never be able to have children. If that disappoints you, I understand." The silence that followed felt endless. I stood in the kitchen pretending to wash dishes, my heart frozen in my chest. Then Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady and warm. "Clara, you are already enough. You are already family to me. I do not need anything else." Her breath hitched sharply, tears spilling down her cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hands overcome. Daniel reached out, taking her hands gently, holding them steady. I turned away, wiping my own tears, my heart overflowing. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something stronger than anger or grief. I felt peace. Weeks later, on Easter Sunday, we returned to the square. Families gathered, children hunted brightly colored eggs, and laughter filled the air. Clara walked with her head high, wearing a light sweater, her hair tied back neatly. Her smile glowed in the spring sun, not forced, not fragile, but real. She slipped her hand into mine. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for fighting when I could not." I kissed her forehead, my voice breaking. "I would fight 1,000 battles for you." As we sat on a bench watching the children play, I realized something profound. The court had failed us, the system had betrayed us, but true justice had not been stolen. Justice was Clara's healing, her courage to smile again, her ability to love and be loved without fear. The Hamiltons had their wealth, their mansion, their crumbling reputation, but I had my daughter alive, healing and slowly finding herself again. And as the sun warmed our faces, I whispered to myself, "This is victory." When I look back on those long months, I sometimes wonder how we endured them. There were nights when despair felt heavier than the snow on the mountains, when I feared Clara would never rise from her sorrow, when I questioned whether my strength as a mother was enough to protect her. But then I remember the small steps. The first time she lifted her eyes from the floor. The first smile, fragile as glass but brighter than any light. The first time she reached for Daniel's hand and did not pull away. Those small steps were victories greater than any courtroom ruling. The Hamiltons thought they had broken her. They thought their wealth and power could silence us, bury our truth beneath lies and influence. And in one sense they succeeded. The court turned its back. The verdict stripped Clara of justice, of assets, of dignity in the eyes of the law. Yet what they did not understand is that true justice does not come from gavels or signatures. It comes from the resilience of a heart that refuses to die. Clara is still healing. She still carries scars, some visible, others buried deep where no one can see. There are nights when the past creeps back into her dreams, when she wakes trembling, clutching the quilt around her. But each morning she rises again. She makes coffee, feeds the birds on the porch, sometimes bakes bread that fills the cabin with warmth. She laughs more often now, and every laugh feels like sunlight spilling into a room long locked away. Daniel has been a part of that light. He has shown Clara a kind of steady loyalty she never knew. He does not ask her to forget the past. He does not expect her to heal overnight. He simply walks beside her, offering his presence as a shelter. For me, watching them together has been a balm to my own wounds. I spent years believing my daughter was alone in her suffering. Now I know she is not. As for me, I have learned something that years of life had not yet taught me. Strength is not just the ability to fight, to shout, to push back against injustice. True strength is quieter. It is sitting at a bedside night after night, whispering words of comfort. It is refusing to let cruel voices become the only voices your child hears. It is believing in her worth when she has forgotten it herself. That I now see is the greatest fight of all. The world still whispers about the Hamiltons. Their name is no longer untouchable. Their arrogance is met with suspicion, their reputation tarnished. Perhaps that is justice of another kind, the justice of truth seeping through cracks no wealth can seal. I do not dwell on them anymore. Their cruelty will follow them like a shadow. My focus is here on the daughter who survived, on the new chapter we are writing together. If you take anything from our story, let it be this: silence only feeds cruelty. If you see a loved one suffering, do not look away. If you are the one suffering, know that your voice matters even when others try to drown it out. And if you are a mother, father, sister, or friend, never underestimate the power of simply standing beside someone who feels alone. Sometimes that is the very thing that saves them. Thank you for walking through this journey with us. If this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your words remind me that stories have power, the power to connect, to heal, and to shine light into the darkest corners. I believe courage leads to brighter days. And though the road has been long, I know brighter days are ahead for Clara, for me, and perhaps for anyone who dares to fight for love when the world turns cold.